Ah, man, I am so busting to do this.
Me too.
I don't know how to start all this because I think we should start with some housekeeping because we have actually never mentioned one of our biggest achievements so far. Why don't you tell us about what the CEO of the New South Wales EPA has to say about our podcast?
I think it's a glowing endorsement, I think. Maybe not quite, but
The latest
you know,
internet sensation.
that's it. But way back in episode 3, I think it was our policy pod, it resulted in Tony Chappell, so the CEO of the EPA, taking one of our LinkedIn posts and reposting it and basically saying, this is a great example about how one of our stakeholders can bring an idea to us and then we can go ahead and implement it because the EPA created that web page with policy updates and that sort of thing.
Well, in that pod we complained. Oh, we didn't complain, but we highlighted that we said, "Hey guys, it's dear New South Wales EPA. It's as a consultant, it is really tough to keep up to date with your policy changes because sometimes you make them quietly
Yeah.
and just they are just suddenly there and you don't know." And we said,
Yeah.
"Look, the Department of Planning, I think it is, who has a
Yep.
great website. Please, it's not that difficult." And you know what? Was it 2 weeks later after our pod came out?
Yeah.
We get the message. It's like, "Hey,
Yeah.
thanks for letting us know, and here's the link to policy updates." And I'm like, wow,
It was a good change. And it's there. I check that page, every couple of weeks just to see what's going on. And yeah, it's useful.
that was a highlight. And we it's now several months ago. We haven't mentioned it.
Yeah.
We can put the link here in the show notes. This is pretty much exactly what we want to achieve with this pod. Yeah, very, very excited. Inside the EPA, bet you that wasn't easy to achieve. Hat tip. Very well done. The next one that we should talk about is, when we spoke to Darren Big and from Steel about the changes to the POEO Act. I thought that was a pretty cool podcast. And we also mentioned that as one of the strategies that can be deployed now by companies to evade or to not fall victim to the broad subpoena powers that the EPA suddenly gave themselves. Oh, sorry, that Parliament gave the EPA. So, recap. It used to be that if you commissioned a voluntary audit or a voluntary report, that was a voluntary report, and as a result of that, couldn't be subpoenaed by the EPA.
Yes.
That was a case where the EPA sued Sydney Water, and they wanted to get some results. So there's one government department suing another, just brilliant case, guys. And Sydney Water said, you can't have that stuff. The EPA says, yes, we can. They went to court. The Land Environment Court says, no, sorry, EPA, you can't have those. Yeah. Go fast forward 3 or 4 months, EPA has the law changed, which is just exactly not what is supposed to happen when you lose a court case.
I agree.
And now, of course, the EPA has much, much broader subpoena powers.
Yes.
One way around it is that you go through a process of legal privilege, where you basically engage a law firm to engage your consultancy.
Yes.
And the consultancy reports to the law firm, and the law firm reports back to you.
Yes.
That's how this works. That is an expensive way of doing it. And, lo and behold, the cases are starting to roll in with us already. It's like, it didn't take very long at all.
Yeah.
Quite amazing, I must say. And I just love it when free enterprise finds a way around. What's a good word for bullshit? What's the proper word for that? But when there is always ways around it. The sad thing about this is you have to be able to afford that.
Well, that's right. Yeah, it costs more. There are some more limitations around it, like there are different requirements for it to meet legal professional privilege versus the voluntary audit requirements we had previously. And it's just an extra cost. And I would say as well, I've got clients coming to me who are now asking me questions about information that's being presented in, say, inspection reports and that sort of thing that are being done voluntarily. And they're asking me questions like, what's the risk that I'm exposed to by us recording hazards that you find during inspections and that sort of thing? It's making people concerned.
Yeah. And the EPA in their announcement always said, we're going to use these powers responsibly. And what was the other one? Responsibly and sparingly.
Sparingly.
Right? Sparingly and responsibly.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. I mean, this is another... Okay. Hey, something I meant to say right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Dear listeners, this subject today has... I always try to be very eloquent and diplomatic and very nice when I say things. That can't be said for all of us, because there are certain people in this podcast that sometimes go off on a rant. All I'm saying is sometimes this subject today may cause one or many of those rants to go off. So just be prepared.
So this is an internal trigger warning for you, is it, Gunnar? Internal trigger warning.
I don't want to throw anyone under the bus here, but okay.
I'm with you. Yeah.
So in that podcast, we called it the power grab.
Yes.
Which is, I think, an extremely adequate title for what has happened in the changes in the POEO Act that were just silently slipped through.
Yeah.
But in one of those changes is that the EPA now has the right to name and shame.
Yes.
And I don't know, there's a different name for it, but and you know what? It's happened. So they have now made use of this and have published an article on, or whatever you want to call it, an announcement on their website that they have started an investigation into a consultancy using allegedly falsified sample results.
Yes, a big news story, I might add. This was big in the media on the day that it came out, and it was all over LinkedIn, and everyone in the industry was talking about it.
Mind you, these are, at this stage, they are allegations. And
yes.
And that's all there is to it.
Yes.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
Nobody has been proven guilty here, but that article, I would not want my name on that one, because it doesn't say anything about not guilty yet.
Me neither. And let's just pause on that for a minute. It's actually very important. And you're right, Gunnar, that I think this is the first instance that we've seen of the EPA using that new power. And I was just looking it up while you were just talking. So what it's called is a public warning statement, where EPA can make public statements about issues of concern where they believe that there's an overriding public interest in doing so. How these things used to play out is that the EPA would become aware of something, they would do an investigation. They would then go through the prosecution process. And once they had secured a prosecution, they would then put out a media release saying XYZ PTY Ltd for this, and this is the outcome.
That's exactly what happened in the Barrel case, right? That we did a pod about that one.
Exactly. And like we talked about, that can take several years for that process to happen.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first case we've seen where the EPA has announced right at the beginning that we are commencing an investigation into this party for these things. And that's a pretty big deal.
It's interesting. Yes. I can't wait what will happen. I read the media release here. So there's a consultancy accused of falsifying laboratory results. I think that's what it is, falsifying reports. I read you out of the article. Following a review of all available data, the EPA confirms that there are no immediate risks to public health and safety. The analysis revealed no history of contamination or exposure pathways that could affect people's health. And we're talking 24 early childcare centers, 18 residential properties, 8 industrial, 1 school, and 84 sites that are yet to be developed. So this consultancy has been rather busy.
Yeah.
My question, of course, is if results were in fact falsified, as is, and we're talking over 100 sites here.
Yep.
How do you know that there is no pathway to receptors? How do you determine that?
Yeah.
Now, unless this has been going on for a long, long time, and they have already looked into this, because ultimately, one cynically could argue, if the results were falsified, then you can't take the conclusions of that report as a result of that. But there's over 100 sites that haven't been assessed properly, and accordance with the EPA's own statement, they didn't need assessment.
Yeah, it's a bit of a contradictory thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting. And I think, and I want to go back to your point, Gunnar, that like it doesn't look great what's been presented by the EPA, but I agree with you. Like I am a big believer in innocent until proven guilty, and I think it is important that this person has their day in court and is allowed to talk about this. But yeah, but certainly, what a flex of that new power that the EPA has.
Can you imagine this person turns out to be innocent?
Oh,
I mean, the damage that is over that consultancy.
yeah, like I don't think the EPA would be careless. Like I'm sure they must feel fairly confident in what they're saying, but still, this has not been proven in a court of law, and it's pretty full on the way this has been presented.
Aside from the changes in the POI then also allow the name and shame, which we spoke before.
Yeah,
Now the name and shame, aside from the fact whether this is a good idea or a bad idea, or whether this was used responsibly and sparingly, I don't know. We will see what happens as it plays out.
yeah,
It does, however, raise for me the question: how can we avoid things? Say this consultancy actually did falsify reports, and actually,
yeah,
if that is the case, that would have been just blatant fraud. And that is a tough one to combat as a regulator or as an industry. It goes into ethics, and it goes into morals, and it goes into quality control. All of those are absolute triggers for me. So I'm trying to be careful here today.
that's now led us down the garden path about talking about ethics, which is what this pod is going to be about. And I think it's worth saying we're not trained professionals in this area, but we are practitioners in this industry, and we understand the way that ethics interacts with our work and the codes that we work under and how we apply these principles in our day-to-day business.
Yeah, see, ethics in our industry is one of those subjects that
Yeah,
I always find really hard, because so you listen to all these ethics talks and you read you read the ethical guidelines that we have, the few that we actually have,
yeah,
and they always leave me kind of empty, because it doesn't really tell me anything. So
mm,
I don't know, when you go to an alga talk, or you go and somebody talks about ethics in consulting, and I always
yeah,
sit there and I think, like, you know what, after the talk I'm like, I don't know exactly what this all meant, because I now know
yeah,
exactly as much as I know beforehand, but nobody dares to say that this was actually kind of a futile talk, because you can't say that.
yeah. I know what you mean. I think it's because it's such a nebulous thing. And what I think might be good is why don't we just start with just trying to define, I guess, some of these terms, or, you mentioned a couple of words already, morals and ethics, and I'd like to throw a third one in there, integrity. So maybe why don't we start with
Yeah.
ethics,
All right.
just in terms of our understanding of what that word means.
So I have actually prepared for this recording, right? So I went to and asked AI, hey, what's the difference between morals and ethics? And it's actually quite nice. So it said, morals refer to personal beliefs about what is right or wrong, while ethics are more shared principles that guide behavior in a community or profession. This is actually the first definition that I understand. So I then wrote in my notes here, so basically ethics is what is governed by our industry,
Yeah.
in this case, right? Or by a company,
Yep.
while morals is basically what your mom taught you,
Yeah.
mom and dad.
And I think my understanding of integrity as well, to bring that in, because there is a difference between those terms. So I think integrity aligns more closely with morals. Like, and the way I understand it is that, like you said, ethics is kind of the broader frameworks that exist in our companies or in our communities. And then integrity and morals are kind of like how you apply those principles on a personal level and how you conduct yourself personally. Do you
Yes.
think that's right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can act very ethically and still be an asshole.
Yeah.
That's I think I that's you have to keep that in mind.
Hey, look, I've come up with an example. Can I just quickly present that?
Of course.
Say you're dealing with a regulator, counsel, or another consultant who has been hired to review a report. It doesn't really matter. But you propose something, and the answer is no. And it says, no, you can't do that because that's against New South Wales EPA guidelines.
I'm with you. Yep.
You then go and say, what guideline? This I haven't heard of that. And you ask, please tell me what guideline you're referring to. And the answer is, well, all the relevant guidelines are on the New South Wales EPA website.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is in itself not unethical. It's not nice. It's not polite. Some may say it's unprofessional, borderline unprofessional, but it is not unethical.
I'm with you. I agree. And I think, and you know, there's nothing ethically wrong with that, I suppose. You're not contravening anything in terms of, you know, the codes of ethics that we work under. But I take your point, so that morally, it's not exactly a kind thing to do, is it?
No. If it then turns out that no such guideline exists, that fact alone doesn't make it unethical either. It makes the answer wrong, but whoever said that could have just been misinformed or may have misinterpreted something else. So just being wrong doesn't make it unethical either.
You're kind of getting us into another area that sits alongside all of this, where people can do things with an understanding that they're doing the right thing, but through a lack of knowledge or a lack of experience in a particular thing, make the wrong choice or draw the wrong conclusion. You know, and happens a lot of the time, and that is not necessarily acting unethically, but it is.
No.
You could claim, I suppose, that the unethical element is that you're practicing in an area that maybe you're not fully competent in, I suppose.
Yes, because if that person who claimed that knows that there is no such guideline,
yes,
that is unethical.
That is unethical. Yes.
So I think that would be a good way of understanding or distinguishing morals. And anyway, so that's a theoretical case that I'm just throwing out here.
Yeah, I think that it's good to start at that point we've just started at, which is kind of defining what these terms are, because they get thrown around a lot. And going back to the original point about the person who's been, you know, who allegedly has falsified results, right? They're working within an ethical framework within their industry, and ethical expectations that go along with that. But the point that has been broken, I suppose, is the personal integrity piece of that.
Yeah, but that you can't regulate, right? You can't tell.
Yes.
See, can we go into because what's the code of ethics that we need to adhere to? That's another good question.
So if we think about what are the ethical frameworks for our industry, the first one that comes to mind for you and I is the EIANZ Code of Ethics.
The Environmental Institute for Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah.
They are a volunteer organization, but at least they have taken the bull by the horns and said, okay, guys, we need someone to look at this industry, and we need to put some sort of ethical and certification framework around this industry.
Yes.
Because there was a complete and utter lack of any sort of certification, of any sort of ethical framework in our industry for many, many years. I mean, when I came to Australia in 1993, I had just finished my studies in petroleum engineering.
Yes.
Right? And a few months later, I was signing reports that were environmental reports, right? And I thought, man, this is kind of weird. I have a PhD in making a mess. That's what petroleum engineers basically do, right?
Yeah.
I am educated in the single most polluting industry on the planet. I am now signing environmental reports. I thought, this is weird, because if you want to do anything more than screw in a electric light bulb, you have to be certified in that field. But look, the EINZ has put a framework. Kudos. Really, they have tried very hard, and I have it up here.
Yeah, it's very necessary. And anyone who becomes a member of the organization, or certainly someone who becomes a certified practitioner, must sign up to this code and agree to implement it in their day-to-day business.
It's a one-pager. Congratulations, EINZ. You have not only taken the bull by the horns, but you made it only one page. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Let's have a look what it says. There's 3 big principles. The first one is promote environmental principles. That's the biggest one, the first one they mentioned here. And this is, of course, again,
one of those statements. And you and I have rather different opinions about this. I am very, very old, and I'm very, very cynical about all this. Well, you still think that there is actually somebody caring about the environment in our industry. Look,
someone's got to do it.
But promote environmental principles is tough in our industry when we have laws where it is demonstrably not about the environment.
Yes.
Right. And when the EPA is demonstrably science unfriendly.
Certainly a bit of tunnel vision, in some of those.
Absolutely. Promote environment. Yeah, you can promote environmental principles, but you are forced by law to throw the environment under the bus in many occasions. That's not only the EPA, that is also on a council level.
It's hard to balance all those things at once, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm a little bit cynical about promoting, advocate the protection of the environmental values and the mitigation of environmental harm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not saying it's bad. This is a great thing. Our industry should be doing this. I don't know what to say here, but I'm cynical about that clause already. Do you want to say anything else about this one?
No, other than it's hard to balance with commercial outcomes and looking after clients.
Well, hang on. Not the commercial ones is one thing, but I have guidelines that I have to adhere to that are exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? And there's just it's. So what am I supposed to do?
That's right. Yeah.
Fight the POEO. And yes, I have fought the POEO as much as I can. And if you've listened to our podcast, I'm never tired of mentioning it. And there's other things,
So I'm good with that one. And then the next part of this is what we were talking about, which was demonstrate integrity. And a lot of that is about personal responsibility.
Yeah. Be honest and trustworthy is the first one. See, these are all statements. The problem with all this that I have is, no shit, you need to be honest and trustworthy, right? No kidding. We're all adults, don't we? Do we even have to say that?
That's right. I mean, that one's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, if I could just hone in on one that's in this section that I think does cause a lot of issues is avoid or manage conflicts of interest and make all relevant parties aware when there is such a conflict. Yeah, you thought you were going to do a rant, Gunnar. This might be a rant for me, but this is a particular area of interest for me because if we're really honest about it, anytime where there is an exchange of money, there is a potential for a conflict of interest. So if everyone in the consulting industry was honest with themselves, anytime you're dealing with a client where you think that's a viable client in the future and there's future work there, that can often be dangled as a bit of a carrot to say, hey, make sure you help us out here and get the best outcome you can here. And there's plenty of work down the track for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And this is just normal practice in industry, right? It's just, and I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with it, but we talk about conflicts of interest. And in my opinion, anytime there is a direct exchange of money between people, it creates a conflict. What do you reckon?
Yeah. I haven't thought of it that way, but you are right. Purely by being engaged by someone, there is already at least a potential or a perceived conflict of interest.
And whether it plays out as a conflict of interest ultimately comes down to your integrity.
Yeah. And what you do with that is, again, are you being honest and trustworthy?
Yes.
Right? That's, of course, that is it. So I've seen reports where I know there is that consultant had a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Let's take another theoretical example, right? So if you have been working as a project engineer for one of the big oil companies, it's all over your website how many 100 sites you have worked on and remediated for oil company X as a contract engineer. All the power to you. Congratulations. Well done. Obviously know what you're doing. If you then, outside of that obligation, do an assessment of a service station of oil company X, you must declare your conflict of interest. I'm not saying that isn't being done, but I think I've heard of reports where that wasn't done. And that's just a shocker. I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't widespread. So yes, avoid or manage conflicts of interest. I'm not even saying that project engineers shouldn't have done the assessment, but damn it, declare it.
Yeah, I think declarations are something that need to be considered maybe more often than they're not, just for the sake of transparency to do that. We could probably spend an entire pod just talking about conflict of interest because it's a big area, and I think it comes up for us a lot.
You know that famous question, and I don't even know but it's such a famous question. One of your clients invites you for a dinner in an expensive restaurant. Do you accept? That's a question that you cannot answer correctly. I know where this is heading. You're trying to tickle out of that person.
Yes.
Are you thinking of the implications?
Yes.
What could that mean? But I mean, one of the single most important things as a consultant is that you win the trust of your client.
Yes.
That doesn't work in one or two projects. You have to be on a number of projects, and you need to work your way into the circle of trust with your client. That circle of trust is almost a personal level. And going out for dinner is an excellent way of gaining trust, because you are on a different level. And that is extremely important, that you have the trust of your client. That when I say, listen, you really need to do this, then the client needs to know that I am not trying to sell something here.
Yeah. They've got their best interests at heart when you say that.
And that only comes when you have worked with a client on numerous projects.
Yeah.
And you have a good relationship. Now, do you have to go to dinner with that person? It all depends, because some clients, because you know them already, there is a danger that will at some stage not held against you, but that person and that client is trying to smooth you.
Yeah.
And that's when things get dangerous, right? On the other hand, if you say no, some clients may be terribly offended. It depends what their cultural background is or what our relationship is.
This is highlighting the complexity of this whole area, right, around ethics and integrity and morals, where it's very specific to the individual circumstances, I think, of that, of that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there is no right or wrong answer is actually common to so many questions surrounding ethics. And that's a constant struggle.
There is no clear yes or no answer. And of course, we all know what to say when it comes to the simple things. A client gives you a brown paper bag and says, you better make sure that those results come back clean. Very clear. We all know what the correct thing to do in that situation is and the ethical thing to do. We're not talking about those situations. We are talking about the many, many hundreds of ethical gray areas that come up every single week, not just for consultants, but for regulators and people in the public service. And there are so many gray areas that we deal with that are not clear cut, like that other example.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about.
It's impossible to capture them in a policy.
Yeah.
As hard as the EIANZ has tried.
Yeah. And as good as it is. Yeah.
As good as it is. But it is just so difficult.
Yeah.
It all boils down to, hey, you know what it boils down to? It boils down to integrity.
I think so.
Personal integrity and morals. The Environment Institute for Australia and New Zealand has put together not only the code of ethics, but they have also put together quite an elaborate certification process where they certify people to become certified environmental practitioners. Again, kudos. Somebody had to do it. Is it perfect? No, it's the best we have at the moment. And that is another podcast we should be doing. In fact, should the certification of environmental professionals be up to a volunteer organization? What it basically is. That's another question. But good on them for doing it. At least there is something that you can look at.
Well, for sure.
By the way, looking at the alleged fraudulent consultant, if that person fraudulently falsified environmental reports, they didn't falsify a certification, which would be a piece of cake. But never mind.
So that's a really important point. I think certification is important. And like you said before, you need a licensed electrician to do basically anything in your home when it comes to electricity. Yet literally anybody can walk off the street and become and present themselves as an environmental consultant. So you have a site contamination certification, which is a specialist certification. Getting that requires you to demonstrate competency in that area of specialization, right? I actually don't have a specialization yet. I've got the general level of certification, and I'm often asked, like, what's the point of the general certification? It doesn't assess your competence in any particular area, right? My answer to that is always, it comes down to this ethical practice side of things, because what it does is it creates a barrier to entry for someone to become, present themselves as a certified environmental practitioner. And the best thing about it is the complaints mechanism and the feedback that comes from that. So if I'm a certified person and I go out and I do the wrong thing, and it's demonstrated that I do the wrong thing and I'm prosecuted by the EPA, well, then I can be deregistered.
Yes.
If the benchmark for people conducting business in our industry is that they must have a baseline certification, well, what it means is that somebody can still do the wrong thing, but they can probably only do the wrong thing once, and then they're out. In a similar way that lawyers,
you would hope,
can be disbarred, or medical practitioners can be struck off the medical role, whatever it is. It's a similar kind of thought process to that.
I see another pod coming. We need to talk to someone from the CENVP board.
Absolutely.
Not board, but from the CENVP
scheme.
From the certification scheme.
Yeah.
And ask them, how many complaints have you received? Yeah. And how have you acted on them? And how many resulted in disciplinary action? I have no idea.
That would be very interesting.
What happens there?
To see those numbers, yeah.
I do know they have an ethical hotline.
Yes, and we should talk about that.
Yeah, I have never contacted them.
Me neither.
That would be another good question to have. How many inquiries have you had?
Yeah.
And how do you help them?
I can see us doing a series on, like I said, this is a mammoth topic. So that ethical hotline, it's interesting that you haven't used it, and nor have I, even though I just said we deal with ethical gray areas literally every day. It's good that it's there. And it's run by a company called Ethological, I believe they're called. So they're a private company. I'd be really interested to get them on and actually even get some feedback, at a general level. Yeah, the kind of inquiries they're sort of getting, what are some of the common issues that come up? That would be fascinating.
Yeah, it would be. Sorry. Third big, let's go back to the EIA and say code of ethics. The third, so we had promote environmental principles. Number one. Number two, demonstrate integrity. Nothing wrong with any of this.
Yeah.
Practice competently is the third one. There's actually the most points are under this. So, provide services at an appropriate standard.
Yeah.
Really, it's like again, we are all for peace in the Middle East or world peace, right? It's like, but only practice and offer services in functional areas and specialization in which one is competent and qualified. I tell you what, that's a biggie.
Yeah.
And that is so tough to admit to your client. Like, you know what, I don't know that.
Yeah, it is a tough one.
Hey, Gunnar, can you write a risk assessment for me? I'm like, whoa. I have a basic knowledge on risk assessments. I can possibly read one and comment on it. Would I be competent in providing one that goes past the tier one or possibly a little bit further than the tier one assessment?
Yeah.
Not my specialty. And I never hesitate to say, but that's me, right? I'm not a very proud person. I'm not someone who gets a kick out of status or any of this. But I can understand that someone, while talking to a client, doesn't want to lose credibility in this case, and that's a toughie.
And coming from the perspective of someone who's trying to grow a business in this space, like, I agree with you. You don't want to be saying to a client that you can't meet a need that they have, so long as it's reasonably within your remit, right?
You know how I solve that, and I think I found a very good solution to that.
Yeah.
I don't hesitate telling my client, which often is also yours, but I don't mind telling them, hey, listen, I don't feel comfortable advising you on this. I just don't. Yeah. But I have been I am competent enough in the industry,
Yes.
number one, to say that I'm not competent in this particular field.
Yes.
It doesn't even have to be a fringe. It could be something totally along the lines of contaminated sites, which I'm supposed to be and I am a specialist in.
Yeah.
But some things I'm not that, I just don't know that well.
Yeah.
But I am competent enough to know, number one, that I don't know, and number two, that I know a ton of people who are.
Yes.
And I never hesitate and say, I don't want to do that for you.
Yes.
But let me put you in contact with someone who will.
I'm with you. Yep.
So that's the first thing I do. And when they get in contact with the person I recommend, I then ask them both, my client and the person I recommended, I ask them both whether I can get a copy of that report.
That's right.
And I will devour that because it's an area that I am not good at, and I will learn that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. You expand your knowledge by, you've got enough of a network that you can meet your clients' needs, even if you can't directly do it yourself in that first instance.
Yes. Having a network of people is, oh my gosh, it is. So you either work for massive companies, and then that's not an issue, right? Then you walk down the corridor and go to the next guy who is a specialist in that field. For many consultancies, that's just not an option.
Yes.
And hey, I handle it that way. What else have you got here?
So we're in the practice competently section, I guess. And I mean, maybe we just go to the last section, I guess, of the code, which is about representing and promoting the profession in general. So it's and I mean, there's a few points in here about conducting yourself in a way that that furthers the goals of the environmental profession as a whole.
Where does it say you're not supposed to poo-poo the industry? There is a clause somewhere here.
It's the third section, represent and promote the profession.
Oh, got it. Do not advertise or represent services or those of another in a manner that may bring discredit to the profession.
Yes. Yeah.
We're running afoul of that in our podcast sometimes.
Yeah, maybe. Why is it necessary for our industry to have a code of ethics, and why is ethics so important? I mean, our industry versus others. And tell me what you think about this, Gunnar. But I mean, for me, I think it comes down to the fact that our work is quite complex. Whenever you're in that situation, there's an element of trust. You have to be able to trust that what you're being told is correct and accurate. Often, when you're talking about how sampling is done, it's just you and the site and maybe a labourer. So there's nobody there to keep you in check. And so there's a high degree of personal integrity needed to make sure you're doing those things correctly. Our profession is one of the only ones that I can think of where you can almost get a better outcome for the client by doing a bad job.
Oh my God, I have thought about that so often.
Right? Like
I have, yes.
A lot of industries are not like that. So quick hypothetical, if you take your car in to get repaired and they do a really terrible job, well, you're not going to pay that person for that repair. Whereas in our industry, often the best outcome for the client can come from doing a bad job. For example, not finding contamination that may be present, disregarding that asbestos sheeting that you found in one of your test pits, changing results that have come in that you don't work well for you. So
that borders fraud. But if you're just uninformed about certain things,
or willfully ignorant about certain things,
that's where I so often think like, oh my God, 6 years ago I would not have found that.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing about our industry, and it takes me back to the point as to why do we need this ethical framework? It's because it involves complexity and personal integrity in a lot of ways as to the work that we do. I think that's where the need for it comes from.
Okay. Is having a certification like the CENVP, the Certified Environmental Practitioner Scheme, enough?
I think the answer is probably no. I don't know what you think, Gunnar, but I guess there's kind of the framework that sets the expectation, but then I think there needs to be some level of good enforcement of that, and I think that's really what we're missing at the moment.
I have been known to be quite vocal about certain things that, in my opinion, have to change in our industry. And then often I am asked, well, if that's so wrong, how do you suggest to improve it? One of my massive bugbears is the quality control section in the net, right? Don't worry, I can see you're scared, right? It has its own podcast. I'm not getting into it, but people ask me, so what are you suggesting? And I have given this a fair bit of thoughts. How can we improve the quality of our industry? And you know what? I think you mentioned it, that unannounced audits would be a way. That's how the tax office works, right? You do your tax return, and most of the time, nobody cares whether you deducted the book or not, most of the time. But what can happen is that at a random moment, the ATO can come along and say, hey, provide all this information, please. That alone already causes a certain amount of raising the bar, and we don't have that in our industry. I know there are audited sites. I don't think I'm going to present any secrets here, but usually we know in advance whether a site that we're working on is being audited or not. Yeah. And we both know that there is a different approach to auditing a site, and there's a different price associated with that in the industry. There's just no question about that. It's the same thing if you do your tax return and you know beforehand that you're going to be audited, you're going to do it differently.
Well, yeah, that's right. And it's not to say that you do it unethically if you're not being audited, but it's like there's an extra layer of liaison and work and an extra layer of conservatism, I think, that you put over it when you know that.
I don't necessarily know whether this is going to result in better assessments, but it will result in more compliant assessments, and we can go into whether that's a good thing or not.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it can be in relation to site assessments, or it can be in relation to a whole range of different things. And I agree with you that I think that there is a role for like randomized, unannounced audits of work.
There's another one. I would argue that fieldwork of not all sites, major, we can determine what it is, 1 hectare or above, I don't care, right? But we need to have a threshold here. Fieldwork must be conducted by someone with at least 5 years of experience. Make it 5, make it 7, I don't care. Put a threshold there. A person of a certain level of seniority must be present, not supervising, not having put together the sampling and analysis and quality plan, the SAQP, none of this. You have to have someone of a certain seniority on site. How do we check on that? That's a good question. I don't want to go into nanny state stuff, but if you are serious about quality in our assessments, the fieldwork must be announced to the EPA.
Yeah. Yep.
Just like any asbestos removal, Class A and Class B, must be announced to work cover, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And then you can have someone suddenly rock up and say, "Hi, I'm from the EPA. Who is here in charge? It's you. Okay, and show me whatever you think is important to have." That would be something that would immediately increase the quality of the work.
Yeah, I totally agree. And here's the thing whenever these kinds of things have come up in conversation with the EPA, that the immediate thing is cost and burden on the regulator. But here's the thing, right? The EPA probably only needs to audit 0.1% of the notifications that they get. In reality, it's just that they need to be vocal about it, and they need to make people realize that there is a chance that they will get audited.
Yes.
And that alone will raise the standard. Like, the EPA doesn't have to get out to every single site that they hear about. They just need to get out to enough of them and publicize it well enough that people understand that there is a chance that they will rock up unannounced and oversee the work that they're doing.
Yep. How many sites does safe work, asbestos removal sites does safe work in? I don't know how many they inspect, but hey.
I actually don't know. And I don't think it would be very many.
No, but people are scared of it. I tell you.
Yep.
And, you go there. Where is your asbestos removal control plan? Where is your asbestos management plan?
That's right.
Where is your license? And where is the training of all the people on site? Not a bad idea.
Yeah.
We don't have that in our industry, and it would make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think it is important because, having rules is one thing. Knowing that they are being enforced is another.
I have a third one. This is now controversial, but how about regulators, people who approve my reports in councils, or whoever is in a regulatory environment, must prove a certain amount of competence.
So competence on the assessor's side, the people who are assessing your work.
Yes, I give a shout out to the Australian. What do they call the Australian Soil Sciences? Society of Australian Soil Science. Oh man, I should know this. I'm a member.
Yes.
They have a year ago, they have launched the Certified Acid Sulfate Soil Practitioner scheme.
Yes.
And in a absolutely brilliant move, they have two streams. One is for practitioners like me, and the other one is a certification scheme for regulators.
Yeah.
Different requirements.
Yep.
But there is a stream where you can get certified as a regulator. Fantastic. That is awesome, because then at least we are talking when there is an argument or when there is something rejected, we are talking about educated people educated in the subject that they are arguing over, particularly when it comes to acid sulfate soils. I find myself arguing with people and I know, mate, you have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. This is so frustrating.
I think there's an assumption that is often made about environmental regulators that, by virtue of you working there, that you are working ethically, but that's not the case. And so I think that ethics is something that does play out in the day-to-day business of regulators as well, and something they need to be aware of.
You have been given an awful lot of power for a little amount of knowledge in certain fields, right? I mean, you may be, I don't know, whatever, you may be a planner or whatever, and I know that there is the pieces of the puzzles you have to assess are just too many. You can't be an expert in all of them. I get it. But where it comes, one of the points in our ethical guidance is act competently and only give advice in areas where you're competent. That's why, because they are not competent, that's why they are going back and just tick box the guidelines. And when you then argue that in this case, that's not the right thing, it is just internally frustrating.
A lot of the people think the EIANZ and its code of ethics are just for consultants, but it's not. It's for people in the public service. It's for academics. It's for anybody who's involved in the environmental sector as a whole. And so I take your point. And I think that if that happened and it spilled across into the public service, then those questions would be asked maybe a bit more than they currently are.
1 hour of recording. Give me a break.
There's got to be some good stuff in there, Gunnar. There's got to be some gold.
Why do I even set a 30-minute timer? I'll try and cut it down.
Yeah.
Thanks. I enjoyed it. And I wasn't too bad, was I?
No, you were fine, mate. It was good for us to, at least I can see this being a recurring thing that we come back to, and maybe some guests and that sort of thing. But it was nice to get the ball rolling.
You have connections to the EIANZ. Let's see if we can get someone on board.
I'm sure we can do that. We'll put a pin in that for a future pod.
But that was good.
Yeah. Have a good one, mate. Bye.
I will.
Bye.
See you. Bye.